Can we get started? Good. Can I just put this here? So good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Keene. I'm Palo Alto City Manager, and I don't think the mayor's going to be able to make it this morning. I know that we have council members Tom Du Bois, Lydia Koo, Adrian Fine, and Eric Filseth here this morning. So they did ask me to just make a few really opening remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over. So it's nice to see everybody out here. Hopefully you didn't make a mistake like I did, which was go to Mitchell Park and was sitting there in the coffee house and then suddenly realized, oh, I must be in the wrong place today. So anyway, so just a few thoughts maybe, hopefully to put us in the mood, right? So we're in a railroad town. The man who gave the name of the farm he owned just south of Menlo Park to our town, Palo Alto, Leland Stanford, was a railroad man. Long before he and his wife, Jane, founded Stanford University in the wake of their terrible loss. As president of the Central Pacific Railroad Company, one of the three railroad companies that built the sections of the Pacific Railroad, later referred to, or we do today, as the Transcontinental Railroad, that connected the eastern United States with the West, ending at the Oakland Long Wharf on the bay. He later drove the ceremonial Golden Spike with a silver hammer at the Promontory Summit in Utah in 1869, commemorating achievement of that vision. With that hammer strike, Horace Greeley's advice to go west was, to use the Silicon Valley phrase, taken to scale. A few years before that, in 1863, the first train had rolled out from Mayfield near the current Cal Avenue station to San Francisco along the San Francisco-San Jose Railroad. That first trip from Menlo Park to San Francisco cost $2.50 in 1863. That same rail corridor, which now divides our town, but which is so vital to the economy and livability of our city, is the subject of our workshop today. In the not too distant future, as Caltrain electrification proceeds and potential high-speed rail looms, as we shall see, our town could be impossibly divided if we do nothing. So much so that to go west just in Palo Alto will be out of the question, or to go east. So we're here to remedy that, to take our own action and ensure ultimately that that does not happen. The purpose of these Connecting Palo Alto workshops and ongoing engagement with our community through multiple venues over the next years is envisioned by our council, and through an unfolding process guided by the Council Rail Committee, is to ensure that the great challenge presented by our Caltrain corridor and the changes coming will not divide us, but are actually an opportunity to bring us closer together. The council's right view is that the right solution for the future of our town lies in the collective intelligence of our passionate citizens. Together they see that, like the Stanfords, we might imagine a possibility to move us forward in the face of great difficulty, that we may truly go west and east in the years ahead. And finally, maybe inspired by the words of Wallace Stegner, who long resided at Stanford, the West is the native home of hope. So let's hope and plan and act for a better future for our town. I want to thank you for coming out and giving up your time this morning. And I want to invite and turn this over to Councilmember Tom Du Bois, who is chair of the City Council Rail Committee. Tom?
Thanks, Jim. So $2.50 in 1863. That's quite a bit of money back then. So I guess Caltrain's quite the deal. So I just want to echo Jim. Thank everybody for coming out this morning, participating in the process. So today what we're going to do, is we're going to work on several key components that'll help us move forward in defining alternatives for grade separations. The first thing we're going to do is kind of confirm the definition of the problem statement. This has been reviewed and refined over the last couple of months. It was the subject of the first community workshop. And then we're going to move on to focus on finalizing the objectives and the evaluation criteria. And these have been developed based on, again, what we heard at the first workshop, as well as additional community input that we've gathered since then. We're going to get a sneak preview of some early data from an ongoing circulation study. And the primary conclusion that I take from that study is that, the real focus here is on future conditions. Caltrain in itself is going to run more trains. If high-speed rail comes, those will be additional trains. And so we're looking at 20 trains an hour during peak periods. And we're also looking at an assumption of about a 15% increase in traffic in that same time frame. And so there really is not an option to do nothing. That's why we're here. It's not necessarily today's conditions, but really thinking about those conditions that are going to be here in a few years. So today is really about exploring the range of options. Trying to come up with some creative ideas of what could be possible and talk about the pros and cons and some of the constraints that apply. Last time at the first workshop, we looked at individual crossings and breakout sessions. We're going to do more of that today. But it's also time to think of potentially other solutions. Can all or part of the tracks be lowered into a trench? What are the pros and cons of that? What could be done with Alma? Could it be reconfigured? Could the rail and the roadway move positions? And then also to think a little bit about what these changes will do to our existing separated crossings at Oregon, Embarcadero, and University if more traffic's diverted there. So today and in our next meeting is the time to come up with some creative options based on your knowledge of our city. In future workshops, we're going to explore specific alternatives in more detail with the goal of identifying a preferred set of improvements that can be recommended to the council sometime in 2018. Finally, we're having a discussion about the importance of process and community engagement. And currently, these meetings are the primary way for your voice to be heard. So please continue coming to these workshops, talk to your neighbors and friends, encourage them to come as well. So the Rail Committee is a group of 4 council members. We've been meeting every month. And we're talking about changing the format of that as an additional way to get community input. And so we're talking about holding those meetings more frequently, holding them at different times, different days, possibly different locations, with the idea that as people want to get more involved, we'll be able to have an interactive dialogue at those meetings as well. So, if you have concerns about the process, please come talk to me, talk to city staff. Let us know how we can better involve the community. I mean, this is a decision that's going to impact Palo Alto for 100 years or more. So it's a big challenge. I want to thank you again for attending, and let's get started with the meeting.
Great, thanks, Councilman DuBois. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Steinwert. For those that were at the last community meeting, I should be a familiar face. How many people were here at the last community workshop? Awesome, excellent, amazing, wonderful. Thank you for coming back. Tom did a great job of going through the agenda. But before I get started, I just want a couple of housekeeping things. I know a lot of you have probably been here before. Bathrooms are out this door. There's just 2 unisex bathrooms. There are additional bathrooms in the main library. It's not too far away. Just know if you go out these doors, you'll need to come back through the main doors here. Note our exits in case there is an emergency. The 2 exits here, you can get out as well that way. All right, let's go to the next slide. So one of the things I just want to reemphasize what Councilman Doyce said, is that we're all involved in a process here of learning and working together as both the consultants, city staff, and the community. We're going to be evaluating different alternatives that we talked about. We're going to explore today. We're going to be evaluating those detail, hopefully narrowing them down and coming up with a preferred alternative at some point. Again, we're really early in the process. We're in the very beginning of that, identifying all the range of alternatives that we should be looking at. So today is a time to expand our minds about what kinds of alternatives are possible before we start narrowing down and evaluating things later on. So today is all about thinking big picture, particularly in the morning session. We're going to continue, as has been mentioned, provide multiple ways for you to be involved. We're going to continue to have the community newsletters to update you on results of meetings and next steps in the process. There'll be additional community questionnaires. Many of you may have participated in that last time. And all the results of these will go to both the Planning and Transportation Commission, the Rail Committee, and the City Council in public forum. So our goal is to have as much involvement as we possibly can. Okay, let's talk about the agenda. We've gone over that slide. Let's talk about what we're going to do today in a little more detail. So the morning session, we're going to talk about the traffic evaluation and some of the results that we're starting to come out of that. Then we're going to break into 4 groups around the room where the maps are located. We're going to ask you to kind of divide up evenly into groups. And we're going to have a discussion about range of alternatives, big picture ideas, some of the things you'll hear in the first presentation. We're going to come back after that and talk about, if people were here last time, we did the real-time survey tool. We're going to do that, ask some questions, and we'll show the results up on the board. After that, we're going to break for lunch. Then we're going to rearrange the room, and when you come back in, we're going to have it set up in different stations. And each location is going to be a specific grade crossing: Palo Alto, Alma, Churchill, Charleston, and Meadow. And so we'll want you to work on, and that session is going to be working on the specific grade crossing location and different types of alternatives and what some of the constraints are and issues are around that. And so we'll want you to work on, because of time constraints, we're going to ask you to work on 2 locations. So we're going to spend 30 minutes talking about one location, ask you to switch tables, move to a different location. I'll go all over this all again as we when we come back from lunch. After that, we'll come back as a group, we'll ask a few questions from you using the same tool, we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So I hope everybody, please don't go at lunch break, don't leave. We've got a lot to cover in the afternoon. Afternoon session will be a lot of fun as well. Okay, let's talk about what we've been doing since our last meeting. So as mentioned at our last community workshop, we talked about the challenges associated with the rail corridor, what some of our objectives and goals were for any project that we would, that comes out of this process, and some of the evaluation criteria that we should have in evaluating the different alternatives. One thing to note, to make everybody clear about what we're doing here, is we're building on all the work that's been done over the past many years, maybe even a decade. I want to ask, there was a rail corridor study in 2013, 2014. How many people participated in that, attended meetings and reviewed that? Great, wonderful, a lot of people did. So that's kind of, we're building on that work. We're not redoing all that. All that feeds into this work, maybe revisiting some of that stuff and confirming that some of the stuff you worked on back then is still the kind of concepts and things we should be studying now. So don't worry that we're not forgetting about the past as we look forward to the future. What I want to do at this point, so out of the meeting we did last time, what we did is Councilman Du Bois said, is we crafted a problem statement. And that was provided to the Planning and Transportation Commission. They gave input, and went to the Rail Committee. They gave input, and the City Council reviewed that and adopted it on Monday of this week. What we're going to do is we're going to go over that statement, get your input on it. We're going to also talk about the goals and objectives that have been through that review with the City Council, as well as the evaluation criteria, and get your feedback on it. Before we start that, though, I want to open it up for just a few minutes to see if there's some broad questions and answers before we get into the details. We'll take 3 or 4 questions people might have. And Vitor has a mic. He'll run around to you. Okay, so we got, let's do right here.
I had a question because I was in the community emergency response training on Thursday, and someone who manages the buildings downtown said the university pipe construction, she could see the emergency medical. Okay, I'm just worried about how the emergency medical responders will get through with the traffic in the construction, if that's being considered. And she was saying, you know, she just sees them sitting in traffic, you know, unable to go anywhere because there's no lane.
Yeah, well, our city staff right now is really working on a very detailed plan to manage traffic flow around this. Those of you who don't know this, sometime beginning in 2018, city's going to have to, unfortunately, but necessarily, replace the gas mains and the water lanes actually under University Avenue in the downtown area. So obviously that's going to be a really disruptive project, and we're just busily planning that right now. We understand how difficult that's going to be. So we'll have a lot of information out to the public and engagement meetings with the community around that. But I think we'll be able to take care of that. I mean, a lot of ways, the bigger problems are just going to be the impacts in the downtown itself and on businesses and that sort of thing.
I have a basic question about circulation. Page Mill has been redone, or supposedly, you know, to make it more accessible, and all that money was used up. So is there county, state, more funding for circulation on Page Mill, Embarcadero? Is there just, I mean, in terms of circulation, Alma was never an expressway. It was supposed to be an expressway. Is there money that can be used for the major, you know, millions and millions of dollars, but for those major streets?
Josh Mello, City Chief Transportation Official with the city. Good morning, everybody. I'd be glad to talk in more detail about this with you after the meeting, but we do have some plans to make some improvements on Page Mill Road through some transportation impact fees that we've collected from the research park development. We're working on an agreement with the county to actually make some improvements at Page Mill and El Camino, Page Mill and Hanover. And we continually work with the VTA and the MTC to identify state and federal funding to make roadway improvements. That's an ongoing process. We have a representative at the VTA's, all of the VTA's committees that help program federal and state funding. We don't currently have any other projects, you know, in the improvement plan, but I'd be glad to talk to you about any ideas you may have.
Yes, so to what extent are we coordinating with our neighbor cities of Menlo Park and Mountain View, going under the grade separation at Palo Alto Avenue / Alma Street may affect Menlo Park, dealing with Charleston East Meadow may be best coordinating with Mountain View and Rengsdorf. And I'm also wondering what assumptions we have in terms of things like how much clearance we need above top of rail if we are going to do a covered trench, or if we're going to go, for example, under East Meadow and Charleston.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. So answer your first question is I'm in regular communication with Menlo Park and Mountain View. I actually have a coordination meeting with Menlo Park next week to talk about their Ravenswood grade separation project and discuss ways that we can coordinate moving forward. The same goes for Mountain View. We have regular communication with Mountain View. Theirs are a little farther from, you know, their crossings are a little farther from Palo Alto city limits, so there's not quite the convergence that there is on the Menlo Park crossing. But I'd welcome any ideas you have as to how we could better coordinate with the surrounding jurisdictions. In regard to your second part of your question, Chris is going to talk a lot more about constraints in the afternoon, and there's actually a slide and a discussion point around the clearances above rail and other constraints that we're going to face moving forward.
Okay. One more. Okay, one more, right here. Welcome.
If the electrification timeline, you know, I've heard 2021, and my question is, what's the master timeline? Because to me, I feel this anxiety over making sure we find the right solution in time that we can actually implement it for the timeline. So I'm curious about the master timeline of our process and how that, you know, when does this have to go live? So how are we planning to meet the deadlines?
Okay, we are going to talk a little bit in the first presentation after we talk about problem statement. We're going to go over some of that about Caltrain electrification and timing and when. Any one thing you want to add? But I think we'll address it in the presentation. So, all right, let's move to. We want to do a real-time survey with you all about the problem statement, the goals and objectives, and evaluation criteria. So, if you have a smartphone or a tablet, open it to your browser. You can use. There is Wi-Fi here. It is what's it? Palo Alto Guest. You should see that as a Wi-Fi. It shouldn't have a password. You should be able to click on it and connect if you need Wi-Fi. And then if you can go to type in SIFT, SIFT.ly. That should bring you to our survey tool, and they'll ask you for a participant code, which is CPA 2. Enter that. And if you don't have a smartphone or can log in, we do have hard copies of the survey. You can mark your answers to the questions on that and send it in to us, hand it in here. That would be the way we want to capture your input on these materials. And we're going to use this tool throughout the day. So once you log in, hopefully we won't have to do this again. So we'll give you a minute to get in. If you're having trouble, if the team could help people out, anybody having trouble getting on? Waiting, oh. Yeah, you want to, yes, you're in the waiting room and we're going to start in just a second. So it should click on and you'll see the first question. We'll give you everybody a minute to get on. Yeah, you should see a waiting to start. Oh, now you should be in. So now you should see the problem statement. This is the problem statement that the City Council adopted last week. I'll give you a couple more, 2 more minutes. Looks like people are getting on there. You're on. You guys on? Got it? All right, cool. You ready? Few more, okay. All right. You need a few more hard copies there? Yeah, okay. Hard copy up here. Vitor, we get a hard copy here in the front. And one right there. Yep, there you go. And one right here, Vitor, if we can get. There we go. All right. Okay. So we're going to get going. So the first one, this is the problem statement that the City Council adopted and has been through, that came out of our last workshop, been through the different city committees. And it reads, while enhanced rail transit service is important to the City of Palo Alto, the Caltrain corridor creates a physical and visual barrier to east-west connectivity within the city. It is also the source of safety concerns for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists, especially at existing at-grade crossings. The rail corridor also creates issues in surrounding neighborhoods, such as noise, vibration, traffic, and visual impacts. While the City of Palo Alto benefits from Caltrain service and supports Caltrain modernization, including electrification, some of the issues experienced along the rail corridor will continue to get worse in the future with increases in Caltrain service, increases in regional traffic, and the probable addition of high-speed rail. So now we're going to switch to the questions. We're going to ask you. So yeah, so if it's not clear or you don't agree with it, then, so that's the question. So you either strongly agree, indifferent, disagree, strongly disagree. If you think the problem's not clear enough, that'd be great. There's some comment cards that'd be great to help us look at ways to improve the problem statement. In here, some of those things are things that we heard last time, like noise and vibration traffic in local neighborhoods, or problems that are created by the increase in rail traffic on the corridor, safety issues. Those are all concerns or problems that are associated with the rail corridor. Okay, so we got. So this is good. So most of folks either strongly agree or agree at least with the problem statement. That's good. We have over almost, what is that? If I can add, almost 80%. So this is agree and strongly agree. Good. So it sounds like we're on generally the right track. Yeah, today the plan was to do this. It'd be great if you do have thoughts and ideas about this. It'd be great to get. We weren't planning on doing a group discussion on this. Well, we're getting feedback in terms of is it starting to hit the mark or not. And again, if we have comment cards, we can get your feedback that way. We were planning to do a group discussion of that. Like I said, that was the focus of the last meeting. It's been through the committees. And so today was really focused to start talking about alternatives rather than spend a lot of time on this one. But we did want to do some surveys to see if it's right. If this kind of information tells us if it's people are generally agreeing with it. If it was strongly disagree mostly, we'd want to step back. But this input says that most of the folks in this room at least agree or strongly agree with it. But again, we can continue to get your feedback so we can continue to refine it. Yes. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, in here are the issues that were identified as problems and challenges with it are things like noise and vibration, traffic in the neighborhoods, the safety issue of increased train traffic, is the safety of the at-grade crossings of bikes and pedestrians crossing it. Those themes are what are tried to be captured here is what were the problems that were identified. So we need to keep kind of moving. Sorry, but we'll take one. Yes, sir. Oh, sure. Yeah, we should get you a hard copy so you can mark. Oh, you're on. Oh, but it can't. Oh, yeah. So Vitor and somebody can help you see if you can get you logged in. Or not. Yeah. And those folks have a hard copy to be able to capture their input. Yep. Yeah, so they're about 10 or so, yes. All right, the next one is the objectives. These were objectives that were identified in the last meeting and through the community questionnaire and have been through the committee. And again, what we want to ask you to do is to rank your top 5 here. Oh, did you? You should see on your screen. You want to back up? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, the hard copy is question 3. Yeah, scroll down there. There are 9 different objectives. Build off prior work, reduce traffic congestion, minimize right-of-way takes, improve circulation for all modes, separate bikes and peds from autos, implement it in a timely manner, reduce noise and visual effects, support Caltrain improvements, improve safety along the corridor. And again, you pick, yeah, you can check, there you go, check the ones that you think are most important. You get 5 picks. So minimize would be the taking or impacts to the adjacent properties. Yeah, so yes, make sure you, as you select, scroll all the way down. There should be 9 objectives to choose from, and again, pick 5. There we go. So on this, improved safety along the corridors, so far the top vote getter. Yeah, congestion is really related to auto congestion on streets, and yeah, right. That's primarily about auto congestion on streets. And then the improved circulation for all modes would be bike, ped, and all modes, obviously. Okay. So it looks like those 3 are competing for the top. Improve safety along the corridor, improve circulation for all modes, reduce traffic congestion, and then separate bikes and noise issues. One more. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So she's saying that it's apples and oranges. There's a lot of different types of objectives, and it's hard to compare them. And yeah, there's a lot of things that we're trying to address in project here, and that's one of the challenges. And so that's why we're trying to see what the priorities are, even though they are very different. So that's why it's one of the challenges we have to face when we're trying to figure out a project. We're trying to solve multiple different objectives. Okay, I want to move on to the next question. What's that? I'm sorry. So we are now on to question on the 5. This is 4 evaluation criteria. So again, there are 10 of these. You probably scroll down to see all of them. The first one's facilitate all modes of transportation. These are they're kind of similar to the last set. Minimize right-of-way acquisitions, maintain local access, such as like to schools and local parks. Minimize visual change, reduce noise and vibration, funding feasibility, support Caltrain service improvements, safe and separate bike and ped routes, reduce delays for autos, and then minimize disruption and duration. It has to do really with construction. And so again, pick 5, the top 5 of these that are most important to you in terms of evaluating various alternatives and what would be a good solution. So this is just to minimize acquisition that would be adjacent properties, so private properties or yeah, to make any kind of improvement. So sometimes to build a grade separation, you might have to acquire property from private properties around there. Could be. So the idea would be there that if that's important is to minimize, minimize doing that with any alternative. Okay. Yes. So I think the first one is aimed at being a benefit, facilitating all modes would be a beneficial. Reducing noise and vibration, that's kind of a benefit. That's kind of addressing making things better than they are now. But yeah, if there are specific benefits that, again, those are good comments to write those down for us so we can capture that. Yes? Yes. Yeah, think of it in that context. Yes, sir. What's that? Yeah, well, Vitor has a microphone. But you're talking about having a younger generation involved in the decision of this, as opposed to the older.
I'm saying
There we go.
something very simple. For each one of these, do it first for people over 40.
Oh,
second
I
for
see what you
people
mean.
under 40. It'll add maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
And see,
See if it makes any difference.
okay, maybe we can try that at the next. We don't have time today, but that's a good. Maybe we can try that in the future surveys to see if there's a difference of opinion based on age category. Okay, all right. I think we need to move on. We got last few votes. Okay. That's the last one. Okay. So we're going to move on to the second part of the agenda and have a presentation by Josh Mello about the future conditions and lessons learned from the traffic evaluation. And then after that, we're going to break into some groups around the room and have some group discussion.
Wow, so after that, I'm a little hesitant to get up here. Please go easy on me. So I'm going to give you a presentation. I'm Josh Mello. I'm the city's chief transportation official. I manage the city's transportation division, which is everything from traffic signals and pavement markings to our shuttle service. And I'm the lucky one who gets to be the project manager for this Connecting Palo Alto process. I want to thank everybody for being here. I really appreciate it. This is really good turnout. This is going to be messy throughout this process because you are coming along with us. You know, part of this process is we're going to be very transparent and you're going to see the sausage being made, and that's what's going to, you know, that's why we're going to have these kind of somewhat awkward discussions and we're all going to be working through this. So what I'm going to present, and I'm going to have to go a little bit quicker than I originally intended because we lost some time early in the morning, unfortunately. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an ongoing circulation study that we've done some preliminary modeling runs to look at what happens if, and I'll talk about a little bit about those ifs as I get into this. So we did a study of using models that are, you know, best practices in traffic engineering. They are models, though, so everything I present is hypothetical and it's based on a computer program. It's not, you know, airtight. It's not 100%, but I think it's going to give you some ideas about what the future is going to look like, you know, if we do nothing, and then what if we do move forward with some projects. So the methodology of the study, and again, I can go into much more detail with you later. I'd be glad to set up a meeting with you if you want to get really deep into the details of the modeling. I know we have some very, very intelligent people in the room that would probably like to talk about these commuter models in a little more detail. We'll be glad to do that. We can set up a meeting later on. But just for the benefit of this group, our methodology was we took traffic counts all over the city, and we supplemented traffic counts that we already had from 2017. So we do regular traffic counts. For this, we supplemented that with some additional counts just for this program. Those are tube counts, where we put pneumatic tubes across the road, and also turning movement counts, which is where we count cars going through an intersection, pedestrians and bicyclists as well, and which direction they're going in the intersection. And we look at all-day counts, and we also look at peak hour. Peak hour is the hour of the day that has the most traffic in 15-minute increments. So the peak hour can be different depending on the intersection. Then we projected growth out to 2020, 2025, and 2030 using the regional growth models. So MTC and VTA have zones. The whole region is broken up into little zones, and they assign the number of jobs and the number of residents that they expect to inhabit or work in each of those zones in defined time periods. So we use that. We did a two-model approach. So we do a very macro level model, which uses a program called Cube, and that is accepted by MTC, VTA. It's a very standard practice when modeling roadway projects. Again, it's a model though, so it's not 100%. And then we use a second program called Synchro, which delves down a little deeper and looks at traffic signal operations and projects out the queues, the number of vehicles that will back up during the peak hour. And it looks at a little more detail at the operation of the intersection. Can you go to the next slide? So I'm going to talk a little bit about train frequency. And this is average, so we're not talking about the actual schedule. If you pull out the Caltrain timetable, you know, a train at 5:12 and 5:15, we look at the number of trains throughout the peak hour, and then we calculate what the average is during the peak hour. So there's going to be a little bit of difference in, you know, what you see versus what the actual schedule is. So for example, today, trains come on average every 10 minutes during the peak hour. So that top chart is 1 minute increments, and the green arrows represent when traffic can flow across the tracks, and the red bars represent when traffic is stopped and the gates come down. So the top is the average. So every 10 minutes today, the gates come down during the peak hour and traffic is stopped. In actuality, you know, a train comes at 14 minutes past the hour, 16 minutes past the hour, then there's a gap, 36, 40, 44. This is both directions during the peak hour. Yes. This is the average during the peak hour. This is not the exact. Okay, can we go? There is 10. In one peak hour, there is 10 trains, yes. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get further along. So current Caltrain operations, 6 trains per hour, total both directions, on average. During 1 hour, there are 10 trains per hour. You are correct, but not every peak hour does not have 10 trains per hour. The average is 6 trains. And that really, when we start to look at the analysis, we're really talking about total cumulative gate downtime, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the specific increments of the trains is not as important as the total time that the gates are going to be down. So the effective gate closure time today, 45 seconds of every 10 minutes, the gates are down and traffic is stopped. And that adds up to about 1 hour per day. So 1 hour out of every day, the gates are closed and traffic is stopped. That's today, 2017. I hope that was a joke. So when Caltrain is modernized, is everybody familiar with the Caltrain modification project? So it's 2 components. It's upgrading their signal system through what's called CBOS, and don't ask me what that is. It's a modern train signaling system that allows them to move in blocks instead of, you know, moving blocks instead of fixed blocks, which is the older way that train corridors were signalized. They're also electrifying the corridor, which allows trains to start and stop more quickly than diesel trains, so they'll be able to run more frequent trains, is the bottom line. And as currently proposed, they're going to run an average in both directions of 12 trains per hour. So, you know, you mentioned earlier, the average today is 6 trains an hour, but there's actually 10 trains during one particular hour. So 12 trains per hour average could actually be more than 12 trains in one particular hour. This is the average over the peak hour. That equates to 45 seconds of every 5 minutes. So we basically doubled the amount of gate time from 45 seconds every 10 minutes to 45 seconds every 5 minutes. Yes, sir. That's an excellent point, and I was going to talk about that on a later slide, but I'll talk about that now. So our traffic signal cycles, the time that a signal cycles through the entire, all of the phases at an intersection, They're, you know, somewhere around 120 seconds typically. So now we're talking about almost every other cycle or every third cycle, there's going to be a train coming through, interrupting the traffic signal phasing, and we have to restart all over again. And that means that we can't coordinate the signals along Alma Street because the coordination's continually being interrupted. And it takes, you know, a long time for the signal to get back into coordination. And in reality, we would never get back into coordination because the trains would just keep coming, and it would, so that's how they operate today. They're basically on demand. They're not in coordination because we can't coordinate because of the preemptions. Yes. So our signal cycles can be anywhere from like 60 to 180 seconds. And you know, a typical suburban intersection has 8 phases. So you divide the 100 and, you know, the 60, but some signals only have 4 phases or well, no, this is adding in an additional 45 seconds of stop time on the cross street that's not part of the signal. So the signal operation is separate from this. This is just what the trains are doing to the crossing. And we do need to move a little quicker, I apologize.
Clarifying question?
Yes.
There's a distinction being made between 10 peak trains per hour during rush hours and 6 average trains per during rush hours, according to your statistics.
Yes.
And now you're saying that that's going to 12 average trains per hour.
Which could be more than 12 in the highest.
Right, so I'm trying to figure out
peak
what
hour.
the amount of trains how many trains per hour will there be during the peak hour?
That will depend on Caltrain's scheduling, and we don't know what their schedule is going to look like.
So the EIR does not specify for this process, does not have the number of peak trains per hour?
We'll have to look into that. When we talk about peak hour, we're talking about the peak traffic hour. We're not talking about the peak train hour. That's an important distinction. That's why we use the average trains during the peak hour, because the peak hour for automobiles is different, most likely, than the peak hour for vehicles. Okay, so then in 2020 or 2021, more likely 2021, because they've, you know, lost a little bit of time in their CalMod project because of the delay in the federal funding that occurred earlier this year. If we do nothing, don't grade separate, do nothing to our existing grade crossings, we're looking at a 10% capacity reduction in our roadways versus today, just because of the additional gate downtime from Caltrain, increased Caltrain service. That equates to an 11% increase in delay in the morning and an 18% increase in delay in the afternoon, the PM peak hour. Our model shows that some traffic, not a lot of traffic, will divert to the existing grade-separated crossings at Oregon, Embarcadero, and University. So this is what that looks like today and then in 2020. And you can see it's basically doubling the amount of gate downtime. And again, these would not look as evenly spaced. There could be 2 trains, you know, right at the same time, a train in minute 1 and minute 2. This is the average. Yes. Bring it on.
Will these slides be posted?
Yes, everything is posted on the city website with connecting Palo Alto, /connecting Palo Alto. Everything's posted on there, including the stuff from the last meeting, all the questionnaire information, everything. Yes, ma'am.
Peak hours, did the PM peak hours include the dismissal times, school dismissal times?
This is not school PM peak. That's an excellent point, though. I think we need to definitely, especially for Churchill Avenue and Meadow, need to look at the impacts during the school peak dismissal time, too. We typically do that with traffic counts. We collect the school peak and then the evening commuter peak.
Right now for traffic?
The peak hour varies depending on the location. So we count in 15-minute increments, and we take the 4 highest consecutive 15-minute increments, and that's the peak hour. It would vary depending on the intersection. Can we go?
So,
Okay, so
Josh,
then in-
Josh, can
Yes.
you said it varies, but can you we've got the Caltrain schedule here, and this is a really fundamental basis for the data discussion.
Yeah.
You're claiming peak hour is 3 trains per hour per direction, and we can't figure out what you're talking about. So can you give us even one intersection that you used as a reference point for peak hour?
So I would be glad to set up a meeting with you and bring Richard to talk about, Richard's our traffic modeler, and he can actually talk to you later in this session today about how the modeling was done. This is a very high level takeaway of the initial results from the model. We're not making any decisions based on this today, so this is, we hope if you're interested in this, you can come meet with us and help us refine this as we go through this. This is a very first look at the modeling results. And what this shows is in 2025 with Caltrain and high-speed rail operating. So this is 2025. This is a pretty ambitious, assumption that high-speed rail is going to be up and operating in 2025. But that's what we've modeled. We would have a 20% capacity reduction in our roadways versus today. And vehicle delay, this is pretty telling right here, would go from it would increase 60% in the morning and then 100% in the afternoon. So almost doubling of delay in the afternoon at the grade crossings. And then again, some more traffic would likely divert to the existing grade separated crossings.
Does that assume any population change or growth?
Yes, this is assuming a 15% increase in background traffic based on development and regional modeling. Yes.
Have you looked at over the past, okay, so can you talk to me about how much, because if you're saying that in the peak time window, each direction it's going to be more than 3 trains, then now if you have delays, now you could potentially have 6 trains, 8 trains.
Yes, and going back to Mr. Burt's point, there is a peak hour in the peak period where there's 10 trains an hour currently today. So there could be an hour where we see, much, much more substantial delays. This is just if we were to just look at the average, this is what we'd see. But in reality, there's probably going to be an hour where we'd see upwards of 100% increase in delay in the afternoon. And this is what all 3 look like. So we go from, an average of 1 every 10 minutes to 1 every 5 minutes and now to 1 every 3 minutes. And this basically means that every other signal cycle on Alma, we're going to see a train come through. So we're going to almost be in perpetual preemption by trains, and the signals are not going to function very efficiently at all. And this is what the queues would look like. This is from the Synchro model. So this is the intersection of Palo Alto Avenue and El Camino. And you can see an unclearable queue means that the queue will never clear during the peak hour. So as 2 cars go through the intersection, 3 more cars join at the back of the queue. On Alma going north, we'd see a queue of 40 vehicles during the peak hour. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see the unclearable queues start to appear a lot more frequently with the increase in train service. Yes, sir.
Sorry, so unless I'm completely misunderstanding something, there seems to be a fundamental calculation here, which is you're not coordinating your street signals with the train signals. And you mentioned just a few sentences back that every train has to restart, the street signals and la, la, la. And you also stated that we have no idea what the train schedules will be. That absolutely is not correct. They publish what the train schedules are, and you could actually use that as a baseline to work against.
So currently, as configured, the communication between the Caltrain signal system and our traffic signal system is one way. So Caltrain tells us a train is coming, and our signal cabinet automatically implements the clearance phase, which is usually a green for people to get out of the track area. And then we serve Alma Street, and then we restart the whole cycle again. There's no 2-way communication. Second, in regard to your second, and we can talk more about this, at a later, but signal timing is a very complex thing, and I'd be glad to go through it with you in more detail. But, our signals operate on second increments, and the train may say 5:12, but if it leaves at 5:13, that's halfway into a cycle along Alma Street, at one of the Alma Street intersections. So You know, our signals operate on a very, you know, tight timeline compared to the train schedule.
Your cycle is out of sync with the train cycle. That's the issue. But we can talk.
Yeah, we'll talk more. I'd be glad to, you know, you can come into our office, we can look through our signal timing plans, all of that. Yes, sir.
Do you also model the estimated expected number of accidents, injuries, and fatalities on the Caltrain corridor?
So we have not done that yet. We've looked at the history of collisions at the crossings. That's an excellent idea, and I think, you know, this is just an overview of the traffic circulation study. We're not talking about safety in this presentation, but safety is definitely, you know, at the top of the list when it comes to. Yes. Okay. I think we need to get moving. So has more detail on the seconds of delay. I'm not going to go through this, but this is available for you, you know, later when we break out into the breakout groups. And then this is important here. So we also looked at what if we started to play around with our grade crossings, and, you know, hypothetically, if we closed a couple grade crossings, if we grade separated a couple, what happens to traffic at a citywide level? Not at the minutia level of that particular intersection, but what does the city traffic circulation look like? If we do nothing, no improvements to the roads, and Caltrain and high-speed rail does not come to fruition, which is pretty unlikely, we still see a 15% increase in traffic by 2030. So this is the background condition without any grade separations, without any rail corridor increase in service. If Caltrain and high-speed rail operate as planned, and we do no grade separation, so we just leave our road network as it is today, we still see a 15% increase in traffic, but people start to divert to Embarcadero, University, and Oregon Expressway. Yes, sir. Yes, we have that available if you want to look at that, yes. If we do... we have a model that shows today's conditions, and then we have 2020, 25, and 2030. And you can, if you want to look at those different years, we can certainly compare them more closely. And again, as we move through this, we're going to have a lot of technical papers that come out, and there's going to be a lot more opportunity to delve deeper. And this is just a very quick overview of you know, what the models are showing. So if we were to close some crossings, again, this is very hypothetical. If we as a community ultimately determine that, you know, maybe closing one might be something we want to look at, something to keep in mind is that the total crossing volume would stay similar to now, but we would start to divert traffic outside of the city. So people would look for the quickest route from 101 to the job centers, and it may be that they start going through Menlo Park and Mountain View. And closures could also decrease the number of people walking and biking, because the routes for walking and biking would become much longer and much more circuitous. So that's an impact from a closure. And then on the flip side, if we were to do grade separations, this is pretty surprising to me when I saw this initial run, crossing volumes would increase by over 20%. So it's the old induced demand. If you build it, they will come. If we were to grade separate a crossing, more people would find it more convenient to cross the rail corridor. And it's intuitive when you think about it, but we could actually see an increase in traffic across the rail corridor. And then if we only do one location, it attracts about 5 to 10% more traffic. And we've only looked at a couple of scenarios here. And one of the things would be helpful moving in is if you guys want to talk about different scenarios in the next breakout, that would be helpful. It includes the regional travel from the regional travel model. So it's not just a Palo Alto modeling exercise. It's from the regional model, yes. And that is it for my presentation. And how did I do on time, Scott?
I think we're doing
Any kind of one outstanding question that I can answer before we, yes, sir.
Does your planning include changes in traffic like mobility as a service, you know, the fact that people won't have cars that they own in the future or not?
So the regional travel model is pretty conservative and estimates that, you know, for pretty much people will drive at similar rates as they do today. But certainly, you know, we do push back a lot on that and say that we're doing all these TDM initiatives and we have a TMA, and, you know, Palo Alto may not grow at the same rate as other cities, but that's something that we can dive deeper into.
Great.
I mean, I do have to break.
Let's move, because the next, what we want to do now is actually give you an opportunity to talk. We've been talking at you, now is the time to hear from you. But how we want to do this is to organize ourselves into 4 groups where the maps are around the room. You can walk over, you can bring a chair if you'd like, and form groups there, and we'll have a discussion about the traffic information that was presented and try to talk about some of the alternatives, like closing grade crossings, like Josh was saying here at the end, or opening them. Is that a good idea, a bad idea? What other ideas should we be thinking about in terms of alternatives? So if you could move into groups, we'll try to make sure the groups are even. There'll be a facilitator there with you and someone to take notes for the discussion that you have in each group. So thank you, and then we'll give it about 25 minutes, and then we'll come back as the complete group. Thank you. We had a great morning session. It was great feedback. I think we learned a lot for some of the breakout sessions and questions that we'll try to improve those next time. So this afternoon session, Chris Metzger, the project engineer, is going to go through a presentation. The material he's going to go through is the material that's at your table. So if you have questions about it, try to hold those, because we can really address your questions really more specifically and more detailed in the discussion group. So we're just going to go over the same material you see up here. So if you see stuff, have a question about it, hold it, because you can talk about it and address it really in detail at your table. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Okay. Great. Everybody can hear? What we want to do with this presentation right now is go through just some fundamentals and kind of get a basic foundation for everybody to talk to when they're at the tables and build from. One thing I want to double back on is that got a lot of attention. I don't want to have any more discussion, but I want to put something out there for the 6 trains per hour and the modeling aspect. That is a 4-hour average. That is a typical approach to modeling. We know there's other peaks that happen. That is a standard approach to look at an average, and then we look at analyzing from there. So that's where that comes from. It is out of the environmental document. So that's common knowledge and data. And yes, there's always variation. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear where that came from. So we're going to look at potential changes to any of the 4 at-grade existing crossings. So what we want to show here is that there are a lot of options. First, you start with, we have the 4 locations. So for any of those locations, there's a range of things we can do. And based on the conversation at our table, this is not a complete range. We did have one more added, which would be the rail over, and others as well. So that was the purpose of this morning, to get those on. But I think the discussion is completely valid, regardless of the numbers you add. But if you look at any of the 4, we can do nothing. So we talked about that. That's pretty obvious what that means. And there's no other decisions to make from there. We can close any of the roads. So there's 4 different options for closure. And then within that, then there's a choice, and this was talked about at quite a few of the tables, which is you can either then take bikes and peds across independent of that, or eliminate all crossings at that location. So there's a tree of decisions to be made at any of the locations. And then we're going to go through and we'll talk about each of these. We can then take the local roadway and go under the rail if we wanted to grade separate it. We can do that independent of Alma, meaning that it goes under Alma as well and does not connect to Alma. It goes under the rail, goes under Alma. Or we can bring Alma down and connect Alma down. So Alma would be depressed, the roadway would depress. So that's one option in a series of taking one of these and going down through that tree. Similarly, we can take the road over. So same types of options there is, once you take the road over, do you separate it from Alma, or do you connect it to Alma? And then there is what we typically refer to in the industry as a hybrid, where we would take the roadway up or down and partially, and the railway up or down partially. We look in, for today's purposes, we look at taking the rail up a little bit and the road down a little bit. That's the more classic way, but it's not the only way, but for discussion. And again, even with the hybrid, you can do that independent of Alma or not. And then their other option is to take the rail and completely separate the rail from the roadways, either some or all of them within the city. So again, that could be up or down. So now we want to talk about some of the pros and cons of each of those and what that means. Again, just to get a common understanding. So to close the railroad track, we just shut it off. Means we'd have typically a T intersection at Alma. We'd have something like a cul-de-sac or just a dead end on the other side of the railroad tracks. And we would then reroute traffic that used to come across this back through other parts of the neighborhood and in the city and get to the other crossings that remain at that point in time. Some of the pros, and you'll see we have multiple slides. You have these cards, so you'll see a lot of these are repetitive. I'm going to hit a couple of slides in a little more detail, and then we're going to go quickly as we go deeper into this presentation. But the pros, definitely, if you're not crossing the railroad tracks, that increases safety. You eliminate the train horn at that crossing. The traffic is reduced near the closed road, so you can see there wouldn't be nearly as much traffic on Street Y if we were to close Street Y. Alma traffic would be improved because there'd be no preemption going on there from the train, as Josh was talking about. It's a pretty low-cost thing to do, and there's very low property impacts with that. On the con side is it would increase traffic on or near other crossings because the traffic would go somewhere else. There would be longer routes for bikes and peds in this particular condition, and there would likely be more vehicle trips. We'd model that and understand that, but there is a limit on how far people will walk and bike, and if you close, then that would likely lead to more vehicle trips. A sample of that is North California Avenue, where you can see it's a T intersection as we showed at Alma, and basically a cul-de-sac end of the road situation on the other side of the railroad tracks. So the next option is to lower the road and the bikes and the peds under the tracks. So we take all three modes of traffic under. You can see here in the picture, the railroad stays at the existing grade that it's at. Everything else gets lowered. Typically, because it makes it easier for bikes and peds in this kind of a configuration, you separate the vertical of the bikes, especially the pedestrians, from the roadway to get gentler grades going down. You don't need as much clearance for pedestrians as you do for vehicles. There would be retaining walls on either side as you head down under the tracks and potentially under Alma. Trains stay as they are. There's fundamentally at the end game, there's no change for them. Then again, we could lower Alma to the local road elevation or not. That's one of the variations. Pros, increased safety again. Again, it eliminates the train horn and improved traffic flow on the grade separated streets. So you no longer have to have that stopping at the railroad tracks.
You can't do that thing with the pedestrians because otherwise they, the two planes don't meet. So it's just one consideration when you're thinking about lowering Alma or not. Is in one, if you don't lower Alma, you can do something like that, like they have it in Embarcadero. But if you don't do that, you have to have the pedestrians all the way down.
Correct. So on the Alma side, everything has to be at the same plane. Well, actually, right. So there are obviously variations on the variations and options on the options there. The cons in this case is there will be increased traffic, as Josh pointed out. If you build something that's better, people will come to that. So that will tend to attract traffic and increase traffic from the vehicles in the local area. There's property impacts associated with this, the folks that are adjacent, or the properties that are adjacent to the local roadway. There is a potential impact to the street system on a broad basis because it's a change and things would change. And then there would be utility impacts on the local roads.
What about personal safety?
So
what about personal
we showed,
is the idea that, petty crime, you'd be more at risk to petty crime in an undercrossing.
So we can take that as a comment. So we will have chances to address all of these on the tables, and we'll collect all of those thoughts as we go. So an example of this is Jefferson Avenue in Redwood City, if anybody's familiar with that. And you can see that in plan view here with Middlefield to the top of your screen. And you can see it basically extended from intersection to intersection, and then this is a view of that what that particular crossing looks like. And this one does have the different elevation for the sidewalk than for the roadway.
Be impacted by that particular grade separation alternative?
So the question is, if we grade separate all four, does that still attract traffic? In general, the answer is probably yes, because people will probably divert now to others, but we would study that and look at that specifically. And the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, how many homes will be affected by each of the, how many homes will be affected by each of the models of grade separations? Right. Do we have data of that? Because that's going to affect our decision process in terms of this for each of the different alternatives to grade separations and each of the different alternatives for each of the grade crossings.
So at your tables, you'll go through an exercise where that will become readily apparent. We have some exercises to show that. We have done some studies, but they are preliminary in nature, so take those as concept. We have that information. So when you're looking at your tables, those properties that are immediately adjacent to some of the pieces of information that you have, the tools that you'll be using, are those that would be impacted. And we'll leave it at that. There's all types of impacts. Not every impact is a complete property take, and there's a whole nother discussion on that. So the next avenue to grade separate is to take the local road and take it up over the train. So again, Caltrain, et cetera, would stay at grade the way they are. The local road goes up and over, and in this situation, we need to keep the clearance is the driving aspect of this configuration, so we keep the pedestrians, bicycles at the same elevation as the roadway. I can finish just these pros and cons. So again, we'd have retaining walls as we approach from the east-west direction to the railroad tracks. The pros, again, increased safety, and this is primarily, at this point, this pro is for the users of the facility. We didn't go into whether there's a change to neighborhoods in terms of safety, eliminate the train horn, and improve traffic flow on those roadways, and very similar to the other crossing, same types of cons. Increased traffic on the local road, increased noise from vehicles, there will be property impacts, there will be local street connections lost, and potential to be lost in utilities. And a sample of this is Scott Boulevard in Santa Clara. So if you're familiar with that, Scott Boulevard goes up and over the tracks at that point in time. And you can see that these properties along both sides have retaining walls adjacent to those properties. So there's no access to the local street at that point. There's many samples. We picked one that would seem like it was relational in terms of the size that we might expect to see.
Excuse me. On that last slide where you were increasing traffic over here,
okay.
If all the grades get improved, I'm curious how that increases traffic when you put the road over.
So if you have a new facility that is closer to where you live, say, and you've got to go to work, you got to cross the tracks. Maybe now you go to Oregon Expressway. Maybe now you go to Embarcadero. Maybe this becomes better. So, yeah.
Does that increase traffic?
We would have to study that, and to see what the change would be. You know, the world is dynamic and people are fluid and they find the best route for them. So we would model it and see. But the expectation is if it's better, just because of the locality of these and the local impacts, that there would likely be more with any grade separation. Well, I'm interpreting the question to be, does traffic increase on that road? So we had Road
Okay.
Y there before in the original, right?
That
We
is
called
wh-
it Road Y. Currently has, let's say, 10 trips in the peak hour. And
Quick clarifying question. I think I saw that the train needs 24.5 feet.
correct.
How much does a roadway typically?
We'll get
is
to
it-
that. We
Okay.
have a specific slide on that for you. Okay?
The clearance levels, Caltrain trains are only like 15 and a half feet tall. And in San Francisco, there are some old tunnels that are only like 17 or 18 feet tall. Right now, I know the 24 and a half is kind of if freight trains were to use double stack, which they can't really use anyway. That's one of the things I know we've been talking to Caltrain about. I mean, are you guys talking about seeing if we could use lower clearance levels, which would apply to both sort of trenching, tunnels, and overpasses?
If we can get different criteria for any of these things, we would absolutely pursue
So
that. Or
would that
consider
make a
it.
big difference in cost?
But
And
currently, it could. It depends on the delta. 24 and a half is the current standard, so we need to look at that. We can't assume that any agency, any regulatory body would approve something different. We can't assume that especially at this point in the process. So I'm sorry, there's lots of questions. Hopefully we can answer all those at the tables because we really want to get there, and there's a lot of things to cover. So this is the hybrid, and what we're trying to reflect here is the existing ground is where we show, hopefully you can see it, some bike ped movement. That's the existing ground. The roadway goes down a little bit. The railroad goes up a little bit, so that's on retaining walls. There's retaining walls down. Very similar pros and very similar cons, slightly tweaked. You can see how as things move up and down and what's adjacent to what you move up and down is impacted by that. A sample of this is Holly Street in San Carlos. You can see here again in plan, you're running between El Camino Real and some local entities over on this side. This shows the pedestrian access to the train station. Here is under the tracks to get there. And then this shows, again, a cross-section view of Holly Street as it goes under the railroad tracks, the Caltrain facility. Then there is the option to lower the railroad tracks under the local road. It changes the railroad profile. Bikes and peds stay at the roadway elevation. There'd be no more conflict with the rail. There would be retaining walls parallel to the tracks, and there'd be no impact on Alma at that point in time in terms of a physical impact. The roadways would still connect to Alma. That has increased safety, eliminates a train horn, and reduces the travel noise. So there's 2 reductions of noise anticipated in that configuration. It improves the traffic flow, and there's fewer property impacts after construction. Construction is a major issue with this configuration. The cons is increased traffic on local roads, just like same conversation. Is if you open them all up, there's going to be increased traffic. So more traffic is more vehicle noise. We still have quite a few utility impacts because now we're going under every road, and every crossing has utilities in it. And then there are major construction impacts to get that built.
You've missed one major pro in that, which is that it allows eastern Palo Alto to be connected with western Palo Alto with no more impediments. We could have many more railroad crossings. We could have a parkland up and down Palo Alto. That's a huge pro, which you didn't list.
Okay. Noted. So,
quick question about your picture. Why do you have 2 different levels on your picture? Sorry, if you go back one slide. What are you trying to show with your picture at 2 levels?
There are different areas we have to cross. So this is a local road crossing where we just have to go down deep enough to get under the road. There are other areas where we have to go under creeks and rivers, and that's a deeper cross section. So in that case, there's an extra depth that needs to go. You have to find the bottom of the creek, and you have to leave enough for it to be stable. And then you have to go down quite a bit deeper under the creeks. Okay. One sample of this is down south in Southern California, if anybody's familiar with the Alameda Corridor and Compton. And here are the railroad tracks that are depressed under Compton. And then these are some photos of the railroad system depressed, and then from the local road, what you would likely see or what one would see in that particular instance from the roadway for these two photos. So now those options, and again, there might be others that were brought up in the first conversation. There's a lot of different constraints to deal with on any of them, and you can see there's a very long list. So I'm going to fly through those. Again, this nice little packet of baseball cards, as they're called, is on every table. All of these are on there, and these are things that every one of these needs to be considered at every location for any option. So we're going to go through it pretty quickly. We talked about property. And you can see a typical type of situation where we're going to grade separate. All of the properties in green would be impacted. Again, doesn't necessarily mean a full acquisition, but there probably are some acquisitions, and every one of those is impacted, so there's quite a bit of impacts. And the range of properties is the range of properties within, be it homes, schools, commercial property. I think everybody knows property is fairly expensive in Palo Alto, so I don't think that's, and then so the challenge is to replace any lost use. That is a difficulty. Utilities, for most of the folks in the room who are not engineers, you probably think you just drive on the road. For those of us who are engineers, we don't see a road, we see a utility corridor. And it's a place to put everything that you need every day. So you all need water, you want to flush your toilets, the sewer's got to go somewhere, storm water has to go someplace, you want to have communications. And so all of that goes in the road typically, power, gas. So this is actually a fairly simple picture. It has most roads, especially in Palo Alto, that have been here a while, have quite a few utilities, and that would need to be addressed. We talked about the creeks, so the creeks can be an impact on some of the alternatives. You have to make sure those are kept in good shape and not impacted.
2014 Hatch-McDonald study said that they can be relocated up to 500 feet. So which assumption do we have?
The assumption is they would still be required. And if there's things you can work with the local entity, then that would be worked out similar to if there's a vertical clearance change. But the assumption at this point needs to be that you have to have that creek, you have to have that capacity. I know the Water District right now is upgrading, and all the agencies are upgrading San Francisco Creek. So they're never going to get smaller, they're only going to get larger, and they need to be there.
Arrow Creek is kind of L-shaped there, and if you flip the L to the other side, you get about 500 feet that way. So there are things that you could do without even relocating creeks out of their current right-of-way.
There are opportunities, but they are constraints that need to be dealt with, and it's not to say we can't deal with any of these things. We love to deal with these issues, but they need to be dealt with. That's the point. Is there impacts? So the next is design criteria and grades, and we talked about this a little bit. It affects two different things. One is how fast you get up and down something, and in this case we're showing something for pedestrians or folks with challenges to get up and down. And so we have minimum slopes maximum slopes we have to adhere to whenever we're moving pedestrian movement. We also have minimum clearances that we work to, and yes, we can negotiate these at times, but these are the standard regulatory agencies. So bikes and peds can go under something with only a 10-foot clearance. Vehicles need 15 feet or more, and trains need the 24 and a half.
Is the 1% rail standard a freight standard or a passenger train, particularly electrified passenger?
It is generally applied to freight, but it is currently the standard that is for the line, and that again would have to be negotiated. And it's not to say we couldn't negotiate it, but we can't stand here today, and no agency, in fact, if you went to the city and asked them for a carte blanche change on any of their standards, they'd say, no, give me a specific change to any planning or anything, and then you deal with it from there. This is the same thing with the city going to another regulatory agency. They won't carte blanche say, yeah, we'll go something. You have to bring a specific thing to get approved.
Specific location for the variance?
I mean a specific design request change specific to that location for this reason. You have to justify it.
Point of
Just a clarification. It's 1% grade. The Caltrain rules and regulations are actually online. If you read the Caltrain rules and regulations, they can go up to a 2% grade maximum. You have to ask the Caltrain design engineer expert, who now doesn't exist. But if you read into the documents, you can see that Caltrain has already worked with Union Pacific, which is the local freight company, to make sure that all future operators will operate at 2%. So despite the fact that the standard thing is 1% right now, a 2% is absolutely feasible and is currently the finished negotiation to be any day now.
So, which is true, but and just like BART, I've recently been working on the BART to San Jose, and yes, BART standards is 3% for their trains, and they say they can go to 3.5%, and we did get some approvals for 3.5%, and we did not get some approvals for 3.5%, depending on the conditions. So it is all negotiated every single time. It is possible, but it is all negotiated. Alma Street is a constraint, as we talked about. So it's parallel, it's right there. Many things are going to impact it. Aesthetics, anytime anything's changed, it's going to change the character of the surrounding. Whether it's up or down, there will be some type of visual impact. So that's always an important element of any public works project.
You didn't talk about road slopes. So there was the pedestrian slope and bike slope, but there wasn't a road slope spec.
Well, so that varies. So what we do with the roadway, what matters for a roadway is you have the vertical clearance, and that's the primary driver of your roadway profile. And then you have to make sure that when you're driving on the road, you can see far enough to stop at the speed that you're traveling at. So those change depending on the road and so on. But it's what governs a roadway design primarily in this would be your vertical curve. Your maximum slope might be 6-8%. That's a design element that typically doesn't govern directly. It's more the vertical curve, so you can see, so you can stop. That's the requirement. You have to be able to see. So if you're going over, you're going under. That's going to drive the length of it to make sure. So that's all on your table. You're going to see it. We got examples of that on the tables, and we'll talk through that. Okay. Caltrain stations. If we look at modifying the grades of the Caltrain line, the train line, if it gets close to a station, it can impact the station, and then you have to reconstruct a station, which requires about 1,000 feet long of level track for boarding. So that's a major consideration. Existing undercrossings, again, if we're looking more at modifying the grade of the railroad, which is shown here, the existing ground is shown up here. This donates the fact that Embarcadero is lower than Alma. Then you have to go further to go under the Embarcadero. Caltrain modifications will impact the project, depending on where they are in their process of going to electrification, installing the power and the structures. What you see here is typical type of what they call overhead catenary system, OCS. Once those are in place, that makes it a different challenge to make any modifications. Project constraint is money. You can see here a general curve, and understand these are all very order of magnitude ballpark considerations for cost, and you can't read it. They are on the cards. So I'll just walk through. We start with the street closure being the simplest, and the trench being the most costly change that we could make. And you can see that there's a whole range in there of what you want to do, and it can vary greatly.
Is this for entire 4 miles?
Buying the houses.
In the back, the microphone. We really want to make sure you guys are on the microphone so your questions get recorded, so that they're part of what we
Do your estimates include the cost of buying the houses?
These are rough order of magnitude cost estimates, and there is some money in there for impacts mitigation. But this is very rough.
Why is the cost of a trench so much more than the Hatch-McDonald study, where they had looked at if there was a trench at 1%, it was $1 billion, but if it was at 2%, it was $480 million?
This is the cost of what we can commit to at this point in time. So we cannot assume getting changes in terms of developing a project.
Are we planning for 2 tracks or 3 tracks? Because it makes a big difference if you're going under 3 tracks. I can't imagine any residents or pedestrians going under Oregon Expressway, for instance. It's uncomfortable. I would urge all of us to consider pedestrians on grade.
So there's a few others, project constraints. Anything we do when we go down there is groundwater in Palo Alto, typically 10 to 30 feet below grade. That impacts the project, and anything you're doing under the ground. High-speed rail passing track is a possibility, so that's why I wanted to get to this slide for your question. Those are not considered in any of these to date. It's something that needs to be figured out and considered, as that would have a great impact and be a constraint. And then construction staging is a huge element depending on what the fix is, because you either have to say we're going to stop something. I'm assuming Caltrain service is not going to stop. Maybe roadways stop at times. We shut them down for a period of construction. But generally, everybody wants to keep moving and going, so you have to move things around, and that takes land, and that takes time, and that takes money. So.
Okay. Can you go back to the previous cost slide? And so when we're talking about constraints, you had said that you're using any existing regulatory limitation as if it's a fixed constraint, even though in the case of Caltrain, they're actually saying the 2% is the model that they are anticipating. Yes, there have to be waivers granted for that. So as others alluded to, we had the Hatchmont-McDonald study that looked at 1% and 2% grades for the Charleston and East Meadow, and at a 2% grade, which is what currently Caltrain is essentially anticipating with waivers to grant. The difference was, I think, $340 million with property takings that would be necessary for underpassing, or I think it was $510 million for trenching. So if you look at that, and those two crossings combined, the difference in cost is not this more than 5x that you're talking about. It's less than a 50% increase. And you're asking the discussions today to all be around these constraints, which, given that, it basically rules out a trenching alternative, and yet our own studies and Caltrain's current direction is quite strikingly different from that. It makes it look like this process is designed to not consider a trench alternative based upon pretty questionable, and actually what is on our own staff studies that we commissioned, inaccurate information.
So Pat is correct for the most part that if we were to combine, Charleston and Meadow and look at a combined trench solution, and we were able to, negotiate the 2% grade, there's not that much of a price difference between the hybrid, the lower the road under the rail, because you'd combine, we're doing 2 crossings, so you'd multiply those by 2, and the delta is not that significant. That's assuming we get the 2% and assuming that we do 2 together, which would...
Wouldn't it be appropriate for this meeting, and especially those that are at least looking at the East Meadow Charleston, to actually be using the study that the city commissioned as at least an alternative to this? Instead, the communities in this group is being asked to use something entirely different from what, for our discussions, from what we've already commissioned and have data on.
So I think the takeaway here is that standalone, this is the continuum of potential costs. We're not saying this is the exact number. We're saying this is the relationally, what they cost compared to each other. But combining crossings, getting variances from Caltrain and other things could certainly change this graph here.
Is there anything in the I don't see anything in the data slides that explains the fact that if you trench or if you elevate, whatever you do at Charleston has to happen at Meadow because they're only separated by 3/4 of a mile. So to have everybody broken up in separate groups, if you're Charleston Meadow, it seems like they should be together because literally you can't do something that's Meadow and do something different to Charleston. And additionally, I would say that the challenge with dividing us all into groups is that Meadow and Charleston are naturally tied geographically. Then you have Churchill, and then you have Alma, but because of where Alma is, we literally have Menlo Park as our neighbor, so we can't do anything to Alma that Menlo Park isn't also doing. And you have a train station and a park there, so there's naturally less citizens near Alma. So in a way, you're pitting all the grade separations against each other by not having it be such a cohesive conversation.
So Charleston and Meadow are shown on the same map, so you're free to discuss Charleston and Meadow and the relationship between the two if you're at a Charleston table or a Meadow table. We're also going to switch, 30 minutes into it, we're going to switch. So if you're interested in a different one, you can go and talk about that one as well. The intent is not to stymie, cross-pollination between the different grade crossings. And I think we got to keep moving because we do need time to.
We're good. Back to you.
Yeah, we're ready. So go ahead. Let's see.
One alternative that I've heard was the idea of, we've looked at a lot of, tunneling gets very expensive, and a lot of reasons it gets expensive is trying to accommodate diesels and large, all these clearance levels. But as you mentioned, construction impacts can be really significant working on an active railroad. So somebody had suggested the south end of town where you don't have train stations is maybe leave diesel trains on the surface and then just do like a bored tunnel for just electrified trains where you would have, you'd be at the 2.5 or 3% grade and you'd have lower clearance levels. Is that something we're considering?
We'll put it on the list. That's yeah, it's a great question for us to look at.
So I've heard a couple comments that have suggested that we're already considering solutions and we're already, have identified proposals. We're not there. This is the beginning today of talking about alternatives for consideration. There was quite a bit of work done in 2013, 2014 that a lot of you participated in. We want to bring that forward and integrate that, but I don't want it to come off because Chris is presenting different kind of models of grade separations that we've already predetermined what the solution is. And the cost, information is also not to try to persuade you one way or the other. It's just to give you an understanding of the general magnitude for the different models.
Great, and so we're gonna break into groups now. You're already most at your tables there. So everybody's, we said they're location specific. The two tables up here are for Charleston. So if you're interested in Charleston and not at a table, you should come up here. That would be great. And then we're gonna switch after about 30 minutes to do a different location. And again, as Josh and Chris said, we're going to go through at the tables the different types of crossings. Again, this is not to pick one and that's the one we're going to build, but to go through that just to understand the different constraints and issues associated with different approaches. And then the idea is get that feedback and then we'll start to kind of knit together what kind of alternatives make sense. All right, 30 minutes and then we're going to switch tables. You can stay where you are for the last part. You don't need to move again, so you can just stay put, turn your chair towards the front because we're going to do a little survey and then talk about next steps. No more than like 10 minutes, wrap up here and get you on your way to enjoy the rest of the afternoon. It's still beautiful out there. It's always beautiful in Palo Alto, right? What? Uh-oh. All right. So we're going to use that survey tool. We're learning a lot about that. We're getting some good feedback on our questions and how to structure those better. So again, get out your smartphone or use your hard copy. We are on page 3, survey 3, and we're question 10. And again,
sound like my husband.
a lot of good discussions. I saw a lot of good discussion in the breakout group, so I really appreciate that.
When you say Alma Street, you mean Palo Alto Avenue / Alma Street?
Yes. Oh, he's already in there. So go ahead. Go ahead, let's throw up the first question. So we're going to go through each of the at-grade crossing locations and get your feedback on some of the alternatives that we have been talking about. So the first one is Alma Street. That's Palo Alto Avenue and Alma Street, the most northerly location. So identify which of the approaches you most like for Palo Alto at Alma. Trench or tunnel, lower the roadway into the tracks, close it for all modes, close for autos only. Can you change your answer? Maylee, can they change their answer? Or not? Okay. There's a, and do that to scroll? I don't think you see all of them, do we? And they're hybrid, and so nobody's voting for those, I guess. That's why I'm not seeing them? Yeah. Oh, okay. So if you hit the back button, maybe you can redo it. No? You got one shot, that's it. Locked in.
You're missing the option of crossing the creek into Menlo Park.
Yeah, that option was one, we didn't have that coming into the room, but we have it going out, so that's good. That's why we're here, make sure we get those on the board. All right, next location, Churchill. Of the options we've talked about. Again, we may not have all the options there, so if your option's not there, don't feel like you have to pick one, but of these, if one of these is your preference, please select it, close it for all modes, close it for autos only, raise the road over the tracks, lower the road under tracks, a hybrid approach, or a trench or a tunnel at Churchill. Trench or tunnel, that's out in the lead by far. Good. So that's closed for autos only. If you want just a crossing that allows bikes and peds, either out, over, under. Hybrid is that approach where we lower the rail and raise the road, or raise the rail a little and lower the road. You can do a little bit to about each modes, rail and road. That's a hybrid. Not saying which way, but that general approach. Okay, next, let's go to Meadow. Now he has Meadow and Charleston together, but let's first one talk about Meadow. So there's close all modes. So you scroll down to close for autos only. Same list, raise road over, lower the road under, a hybrid, which is a little both, or trench or tunnel. That does not surprise me. All right, looks like we got most of the votes in. All right, next one, and the last one is Charleston. Same questions here. I'm going to guess it's... Oh, few for road over. Good. Oh, hybrid's trying to come back. Okay. Yeah, again, we didn't have that coming into the room, but we got it now, and I think I got on the notes from your discussion. I heard you talking about that in your group.
Just out of curiosity, why was do nothing not on any of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. I think we got all those. All right. Couple of questions just about today. Did you find today's workshop useful? Be nice now. So yes, it's very useful. Somewhat useful. No, not very good. No, I'd prefer a different format. Different facilitator. Different venue. Yeah, where do I get to vote? No, I don't get to vote.
You only get one vote.
No, I don't get, I get one vote. Oh, good. Well, it's over half. That's good, at least. All right, next question. Can we count on your participation in the next workshop? We'll talk about in the next steps. We'll go over that. 7 years from now. No, it's very soon. We're going to have you have to commit now, and if you don't show up. Yeah, just if today, like a Saturday, is not good for you, just tell us that's what that's meant to be. If this is Saturdays aren't good, then I would click that one. Okay. Let's talk about next steps. Okay, as we talked about, we're early in the process. Today's like identifying the range of alternatives, make sure we got all the ideas that we should be thinking about on the list. We heard some new things today. It was great. We got confirmation that a lot of stuff that was studied before is still very relevant, still needs to be on the table, and a lot of people think those might be the right approaches, so that's great. We've confirmed all that. You want to put the process slide where we are? So as you can see, we're just at that first alternatives development phase. We're going to work now to kind of figure out the range from what we've heard today, assemble the range of alternatives that we think need to be studied in the next, more detailed, and we'll bring that back to you. Let's go to the next slide, talk about next steps. So there's a rail committee meeting in early October. That's the next meeting. Those will be discussed at. And then also here in September and October, there'll be a circulation study, an updated trenching report, and a finance paper that's going to come out. So those will be made available to you on the city website, and we'll let you know when they're up and available to look at, get your feedback on. And then at this point, we don't have a specific date yet, but we're thinking about late October or November, we come back to you for the third workshop, and that's where we'd have the range of alternatives that we've been talking about and propose that's what we're going to move forward to study in more detail and really start to analyze it. But we'll do that and confirm that with you, with the council, and through that whole process we talked about before we move into that step of doing the detailed evaluations of any of the alternatives. And again, our goal is to move through this process so we have a preferred alternative by the spring of next year. And Josh?
Could you go back to the last slide? I just want to jump in and let everybody know that, this is a much different process than you're used to. We're not going to go into a dark room, a back room, and develop alternatives without coming back to you again. We're going to take your ideas. We're going to try to distill them a little bit, not too much though, because we want to keep your ideas on the table and then bring them back to you, at the follow-up meeting. This flow chart here at the bottom represents how each of the decisions will be made throughout this process. So our goal here is to make sure that you are part of every single decision, that something doesn't slip through the cracks, and that you're not, we don't want you to not be able to, see things before they're brought forward through the Planning and Transportation Commission, the Rail Committee, and the City Council. We'll always come back to you and reaffirm the decision, and that's what we did this morning with the problem statement and the objectives and the evaluation criteria. So when you come back to the next workshop, you'll see a little bit of work done on what came out of today, but we're not going to go ahead and make any decisions without first coming back to you and getting your feedback on that.
Because we have a mic. Somebody. Oh, thank you. Over here. I think that's the first hand, and then here in the middle. We'll just take a few. So I got 3 so far.
As far as I know, and I may have missed this because I was late coming in, the Santa Clara Measure B money is currently hung up in a lawsuit, and nobody knows how long it's going to last and stuff. How does that affect things?
That's a great question. So we didn't talk about this at this workshop. We talked a little bit about it at the first one. But Measure B, which was passed in Santa Clara with about 70% of the vote this past November, includes $700 million to do grade separations in Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. And there are 8 existing grade crossings that need to be separated in those 3 communities. So there's $700 million for 8 grade separations, essentially. That's a significant amount of money and could potentially help us a lot moving this project forward. However, the Measure B funding is held up in court right now, and our city attorney has said that could be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years before it's resolved. It's going to the appellate court there's someone challenging the validity of the referendum and the way that the funding will be allocated. So we'll keep you updated on that as we move through this process, and I'm sure there'll be coverage in the news as well as that lawsuit progresses.
Thank you, Barry. Keep that one right here, and then we'll go here. First, the lady in the back here.
For the finance report that was on the previous slide, has Palo Alto yet hired a financial professional firm to look at the various different options of how to pay for some of the options, particularly more expensive ones? Is there a professional firm that focuses on that kind of thing hired as part of the process?
Yes, the project team includes a financial firm that will do very kind of initial projections on what some of the funding sources are available to the city.
So we're going to go here and then over here, and that's going to be it. Guys, we got to get out of here by
For our next workshop, could you supply us with some information about the Compton solution? Are people happy with the trenching through their city? Has it made the city enhancement to live in the city, or is it do people think it was not a good idea? Because I don't know how long that's been in effect.
the Alameda corridor.
Yeah, the trench that we showed in Compton is part of what's called the Alameda corridor, and that was a huge mega infrastructure project for LA County where they grade separated a very important freight corridor that connects to the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles. There's also a recently completed trench in the San Gabriel Valley that was done through an interesting joint powers board kind of arrangement. We're keeping our eye on that, and we're liaisoning with the people that helped build that to see if there's any lessons to be learned from that as well.
All right, one more, and then we're going to wrap it up.
I thought I did. Okay. So on the subject of funding, and this may sound unrelated at first, but really truly not. Stanford's going through its GUP process right now, and they're talking about 200,000 square feet a year. Is there any way we can use that process to establish a nexus between Stanford's development and their use of the rail corridor to maintain zero net new trips, and use that nexus to require mitigations, which might include funding these projects? Thank you.
There you go. The GUP is being analyzed by the county in an EIR that's going to be released later this month. I'd encourage everybody to look at it, and we're going to make those comments. The Planning Commission already looked at the traffic study and raised that at their meeting. This idea that Stanford can perpetuate their no net trips pledge is contingent on good connections for all modes of transportation, and I think grade separations are definitely part of that story.
Okay, we do need to wrap it up, guys. These glasses were found. If they look like yours, they're red with black and white spotted arms. I have them if you lost your glasses. Yes.
There's been a question about how to provide additional feedback to the city team about this meeting and other things. You can call me at 650-329-2520. You can come into my office. We have open office doors. We've been doing stakeholder interviews throughout this process, so if you think you really want to get more involved in this process, please come and see us. I'll come out and meet with you and meet with your neighborhood association if you need me to. But we have an open door throughout this whole process, so please call us. I have a couple of my cards left, but you can also get in touch with us through the city website. We're the Transportation Division. Yeah, email is first and last name at City of Palo Alto. Yes, and there's comment cards back there in green. Fill those out if you feel like something you said today was not heard and not addressed.
They also have all the contact info on them as well, so please grab those, and you can fill them out later, bring them in, email them to us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.